This Week from WATE 6 on your side starts now.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Tennessee This Week. I'm Blake Stevens. With Election Day drawing nearer and early voting underway, we're helping you meet two more candidates. This time, the two Democrats running in the State Senate District 6 primary, Sam Brown and Jane George.
This is my hometown, and I love Tennessee, and I've had some amazing experiences in the world as a scientist, as a physician. I worked for RAM, I volunteered for RAM, I volunteered for Flying Doctors of Mercy. I've had an opportunity to study in 3 different countries as a scientist, and I wanted to bring all of that home to Tennessee. And one way that I could be really effective is to get involved in politics. Right? It's a way that you can reach a lot of people. And when I came back and saw what was happening in Tennessee, I felt really sad about it. I really felt like one of the main ways that I could contribute was to really sit back and look at what are the offices where I could have the greatest impact. And I feel like my skill set is particularly valuable at the level of the Senate.
This is the community that I grew up in, the community that I love. It's my home. And I began to hear the stories and the voices of the people in the community that I serve. And I realized that there were so many things that were not being translated to the halls of government in Nashville, Tennessee. So many of the needs and the wants of the people in the community that I serve were not being heard. And then after relearning and being reintroduced into the political arena of Knoxville, I learned that our incumbent senator had not been challenged recently. And so I thought it was just important for someone to step up to the plate, to give the people of District 6 the reality that they have another option.
The candidates seemingly in sync on ways to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. The two advocating for more money for schools and getting more Tennesseans access to health insurance.
We all know that for our schools to be safe, it's going to cost money. If we're going to have smaller class sizes, we're going to have more teachers. If we're going to have more classes, we're going to have more space to put those children in. That all costs money. In order to keep those spaces protected and safe for teachers and kids, there's all kinds of protocols that need to be put in place, and those cost money.
Providing our school district with the resources necessary so that teachers can be safe and healthy. Providing each local school district with the resources necessary so that students can access their materials and have an environment of learning that will help them to yield success. We also need to have a serious conversation about expanding Medicaid, Blake. Being under this pandemic, I do not understand how we can allow politics to stop us from making sure that all Tennesseans have the best or the most access to quality health care.
270,000 people have lost their jobs since, and the insurance that went with it, since the beginning of this pandemic. That's a lot of people. We already had over 600,000 that didn't have health care. That's close to 1 million people that do not have health care right now in a pandemic. These things are at a crisis mode. We need people in the Senate, in the legislature, that are equipped to handle a crisis. There are billions of dollars out there. We got hospitals closing. We've got people coming from rural areas into our bigger cities that are taking up bed space because they don't have it in their communities. This is now in our backyard. When someone's husband or someone's wife or someone's grandmother has a heart attack and they can't get a bed because there are people coming from the outside counties, this is now in our backyard.
The two also highlighting other issues they hope to tackle if elected.
Voting rights historically is something we have always protected. I mean, historically, it's here in Tennessee where the deciding vote was cast to grant women suffrage in this country. So it's in our DNA to create pathways to the ballot box, but just in recent time, we've wanted to put up those barriers. So I want to bring awareness to that, and if elected, that will be a part of my legislative agenda to make sure that we create those opportunities for people to vote.
Living wage is a big deal in the state of Tennessee. It's hard to get out of the cycle if you can't afford to put your kid in childcare because you make $7.25 an hour. Even two parents having a child that's not of age to go to school yet, has no options, have to pay for that privately. They're not making enough money to do that.
George also talking guns, saying she believes they are a right, but that there is a need for reform.
I think there has to be a waiting time. If they want women to wait for 2 days before they can have an abortion, then I don't think it's unreasonable that somebody has to wait 2 days to get a gun. I think that mental health checks are important in terms of if someone has committed a crime. We have to be able to look at that and the context of that. So I think there's very fair and reasonable gun regulation. I don't think we need these big magazine guns.
Brown also running to lift up minority communities, saying that's best done through education and small business support.
I am not in favor of school vouchers. I am not in favor of charter schools. I think that public dollars need to go to fund public schools because it's through public education, I think, is where we can begin to alleviate a lot of the disparities that have been created in our community. There is a role that the government has to play to kind of level the playing field. I believe it would be a wonderful gesture for the state of Tennessee to offer grants to minority entrepreneurs, specifically entrepreneurs of color who are seeking to start up businesses that will create jobs in our communities. It is through small businesses that communities grow. It is through small businesses that high school student can work that after school job to help supplement their household's income to possibly pay for the application fee for a college or the ACT fee or pay for their senior graduation fees. It's through small businesses that mom or that dad can earn supplemental income.
George also sharing her perspective on reopening schools and the action she believes the state should take to combat coronavirus.
I think it's a huge mistake to put the kids back into school right now because I think the schools will be shut down in 6 weeks. Mark my word. I don't think that it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. So I think what we have to do is have a true shutdown. I think that if we can do that and we can have 30 days where we have an opportunity to protect people, we do a true stay at home for 30 days where essential becomes truly essential and scaled down.
Well, again, that is the Democratic primary. Whoever wins will face current state senator Becky Duncan Massey in a general election, who is the only candidate on the GOP side. Well, still to come, Republicans in the Senate primary taking aim at each other. You're watching Tennessee This Week on WATE 6 on your side. Stay with us.
Just watch how I do it. Let me show you what I do. What I do. Just watch how I do it. Yeah, this is how I do it. How I do it. I got to show you. Let me show you what I do. What I do. Just watch how I do it. Yeah, this is how I do it. How I do it. Just watch me.
Hey guys, that was a sneak peek of our virtual classes. Make sure you contact us to schedule your child's first virtual lesson.
How I do it. Let me show you what I do. What I do.
Jill.
Danny.
Haggerty.
You bet. Kathy?
Yep. What about Congress?
No question, Josh Gap.
Josh Gap, the outsider.
Josh Gap, the doctor, who's trained to spot cancer, who's going to stop political correctness from devouring our God-given rights.
Hold China accountable.
And bring production of life-saving medicines back here.
To help President Trump make America great again. Josh Gap.
Great choice.
I'm Josh Gap, and I approve this message.
We're building the biggest news operation in the country. 5,500 journalists across the U.S. to deliver you news, not talk. Facts, not opinions. News Nation, coming September 1st to WGN America. Your news, your nation.
Quick impression, me 10 years ago.
Wednesday, it's the new family comedy that's driving home big laughs.
You left your keys. You were in the car alone with the...
Yeah, she moved it.
What?
United We Fall, ABC Wednesday.
Hey, welcome back to Tennessee This Week. Competing endorsements, attack ads. The U.S. Senate primary here in Tennessee is really heating up. Let's start with those endorsements. Current Senator Marsha Blackburn endorsing Bill Haggerty. Senator Blackburn writing in part, quote, "Bill is a true conservative and he will always fight for you. Send him to the Senate to work with me and President Donald Trump." And last Friday, President Trump revisiting his early endorsement of Haggerty. Meanwhile, Dr. Manny Sethi getting an endorsement from a high-profile Republican, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. And speaking of big-name GOP senators, Kentucky's Rand Paul campaigning with Dr. Sethi, calling him, quote, the real deal. On the airwaves, Sethi and Haggerty going at it, challenging each other's conservative agendas, invoking Obamacare, Massachusetts, Al Gore, and Mitt Romney, while trying to cast themselves as the true conservative. The divide between them is such that a candidate in another race is bringing it up. Dr. Josh Gapp running for the 1st District congressional seat in Tennessee's 1st District. Gapp's ad argues that he is the one that Haggerty and Sethi voters can both agree on. Meanwhile, another candidate in the large field of candidates is calling on Sethi and Haggerty to make a change because of COVID-19. Our state capitol reporter Chris Bungard spoke to George Flynn about his message.
Memphis Dr. George Flynn isn't having campaign events because of COVID-19, and he says his opponents shouldn't either.
I cannot imagine why my opponents would continue to want to have events without masks. And I call them out on it. And I say it's the wrong thing to do. And if you're going to do that, you're not a leader.
George Flynn was asked if he was referring to former U.S. Ambassador to Japan Bill Haggerty during an early voting event last Friday in Nashville, and trauma surgeon Manny Sethi, who appeared last Saturday at a Rutherford County political event.
I'm referencing them. We've got to be the party of personal responsibility. We know that masks work. We know that social distancing works.
Flynn's words about fighting COVID-19 came after President Trump Tuesday issued his own message about rising virus numbers nationwide, including Tennessee.
I have the mask right here. I carry it, and I will use it gladly.
The doctor says it's about saving lives instead of publicly campaigning.
I think it's unconscionable that we would advocate having these meetings right now, especially events for campaigns. That is it's wrong, and I will not be a part of it.
As for being a perennial candidate, Flynn says he'll be one until there's a conservative majority in the country. Reporting from Nashville, Chris Bungard.
Both the Haggerty and Sethi campaigns said they would not stop having campaign events. You can read their full statements on our website and our free news app. Thursday, Governor Lee said political candidates should encourage mask wearing at their events. That coming on the same day he rolled out a new public service announcement campaign. It's dubbed Face It, Masks Worked. The video airing around the state and online, it features Tennesseans urging you to wear a mask and then sharing their reasons for doing so, saying they're fighting everything ranging from small business to students in the classroom to football. The takeaway from the governor's office, a face wearing a mask is the face of a fighter. Well, still to come, our panel of pundits dives into this race. You're watching Tennessee This Week on WATE 6 on your side. Stay with us, everyone.
Growing up, Dad was outnumbered. Even our dog Millie was a girl. Dad never complained, though, because John Clark was a girl dad from the beginning. As a good Tennessee girl dad, that meant teaching us how to shoot a gun. I want everyone to know Dad is an incredible husband to my mom and father to us. And he taught us how to shoot guns.
I'm John Clark, and I approve this message because the Second Amendment matters to the Clarks.
If you have Medicare and Medicaid, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee is here to offer you even more benefits with a Blue Care Plus plan at no extra cost.
My Blue Care Plus plan means I have someone right here in Tennessee on the other end of the phone when I call.
It means I have people like Allie who listen and really care.
It means I get more medical, dental, and vision benefits. Like $5,000 for dental care.
And $1,200 for hundreds of over-the-counter items.
Plus 100 rides for doctors and pharmacy visits. That's a lot of rides.
As a not-for-profit with a mission to serve, we're right here for you and with you.
I love having Tori in my corner. Everybody needs a Tori.
You can enroll in a Blue Care Plus plan at any time.
Get these great benefits and more. Call 833-807-1234. That's 833-807-1234.
All right, we're going to get started here. We've got Courtney Piper, Craig Griffith, and George Corda. All right, so we just heard from the two Democratic candidates hoping to become the nominee there and run against Becky Duncan Massey for Senate District 6, State Senate District 6. We also heard them talk about a need for Medicaid expansion and more funding for schools. How does a Democrat offer a message to contrast a state senator that also supported Medicaid expansion and did not support things like school vouchers? Courtney?
Well, these Democratic candidates can be a lot more robust and direct with their messaging because that's the base that they are appealing to. Our incumbent, and this is the district where I live, Becky Duncan Massey, she is a Republican, and so oftentimes she has to be very diplomatic with her messaging as it relates to things like Medicaid expansion. So what the Democrats can offer, and especially with these Democratic candidates in the primary, is they can be a lot more direct, forthcoming, and motivating of their base in the primary.
George, did you hear anything in my conversation with them that motivates voters to choose a Democrat over the incumbent?
Well, it was fairly straightforward, more or less doctrinal Democratic positioning, and there's nothing surprising in any of it. Now, of course, the closer they get to sounding like her, or the closer they get to being less Democratic sounding, they're going to lose their base, whatever it is. So they're in a bit of a tough spot from the standpoint of running against Duncan Massey, who is the odds-on overwhelming categorical favorite to win this thing. So I would, admire him for trying, but I don't think with what they're saying, they're gonna get over the hill or to the top of the hill.
And Craig, do you see stark differences between the two Democratic candidates and the incumbent senator?
Well, there are many differences, but the two things that they're concentrating on, expand Medicaid and do away with vouchers. I'll have to remind them that the senator voted to get for Insure Tennessee, the Medicaid expansion, and voted against vouchers. I think that the problem that they have is that they need to come up with a new idea. They don't have any new ideas to address the problems of the state. They're doing pretty much the same policies that go through all Democratic races in the community. And they need to come up with some different ideas as to how to improve healthcare and to how to improve education. Until they do, it's going to be very difficult to knock off an incumbent who has been successful in office.
Well, Craig, let me ask you this question. Medicaid expansion is getting brought up a lot here for these state races. We've seen a lot of people lose their health insurance throughout the pandemic. So in a post-COVID-19 world, do you think next year may be the year to revisit Insure Tennessee?
I can revisit it all you want. There aren't the votes in the state Senate or the state House for it. That's been clear for the last 5 years, and I don't think that the governor's going to come out for it. Which is why I think all these people need to come up with different plans to address that issue that you're talking about: lack of health care insurance for some of the people in the state that need it the most. And it's going to come up a lot more now because many people are losing jobs that came with health care insurance, and they won't have it.
There is no other option. Expanding Medicaid is our best option. Anything else is just going to keep delaying people having the ability to access health insurance and get health care.
Well, the compounding that problem is the fact that the whole COVID-19 situation has been a terrible blast to the state budget, to local budgets, to the federal budget. I mean, we were living on a credit card. Now we're living on a double gold platinum credit card with just borrowing or printing whatever it is they're doing, as much money as they think they need to do to keep things afloat. So expanding Medicaid at this point from a budgetary standpoint is just a kind of mind-numbing.
And Courtney, so
that's false. That's tax dollars. That's tax dollars that Tennessee put into the federal government that should be coming back to the state of Tennessee, not going to other states.
Courtney, I suppose my question is, how do you see it happening? It seems like you see it as it has to happen. Craig's pointing at votes. George is pointing at money. How do you see it as a possibility in Tennessee?
The way that it's a possibility in Tennessee is you need to have a lot of politicians pull their heads out of their rear ends and start accepting science and data that shows that expanding Medicaid is not only the right thing to do, it's a necessary thing to do, and it provides a lot of economic success for the state as well.
So you're not writing it off. Okay, I do want to move on to another primary race for another Senate seat. This one, a GOP race for U.S. Senate. And if you had your TV on this week, you know what I'm talking about. Bill Hagerty, Ambassador Hagerty, and Dr. Manny Sethi. That race is certainly heating up. They're both working to convince voters. They're more conservative than the other and more Trump-friendly than the other. So who is selling that message best to voters in the GOP? George?
Well, Hagerty, certainly that's been the foundation of his entire campaign. It's what he's banking on. It's what he's pushing. He's got, to the degree Sethi can get this message out, I mean, he's got two real problems. He contributed to Albert Gore, and that's just not something a Republican running for the U.S. Senate can do without explaining it, and then you're going to wind up having a lot of problems on top of it. That's one thing. The other thing is sort of the campaign tactics with the Massachusetts Manny stuff. I don't think that's going to fly very high, because in the past, you could do that, and it was really hard to answer it. You had to either buy ads or do contracts mailers. Now, with digital communications, with Twitter, with the media, with the internet, with Facebook, with all of that, with the ability to reach out to voters personally, it makes it harder for that stuff to stick. I think all evidence is that Sethi's coming on and Hagerty's really sweating.
Courtney, let me ask about endorsements, because obviously both of them are getting as many as they can. Do they matter in this race?
President Trump's endorsement matters, but it's only going to matter as much as Bill Hagerty is going to work and do the real grassroots work it will take to win a primary. Manny Sethi has Senator Ted Cruz from Texas endorsing him, but who in the, not to be corny, but Cruz doesn't trump Trump. And I'm not exactly sure how many Tennesseans know who Ted Cruz is or care if he endorses one of our U.S. Senate candidates.
And Courtney, so you got George Flynn, obviously being critical of President Trump and his handling of the coronavirus. How do you think that plays among voters?
Well, what we've seen in polling nationwide is that voters are continuing to have less and less confidence in how Donald Trump has handled the pandemic, and are disapproving of the way that he's led this country through a pandemic. So it's no surprise that someone who is a Republican, a perennial candidate, and also a doctor is taking this opportunity to be critical of President Trump and hold him accountable.
All right, Craig, so the questions are, there's a few at this point, we're racking them up here, but who is selling the most conservative message to GOP voters? Do endorsements matter? And what do you think of Mr. Flynn's approach?
Well, I've talked with some political people in Nashville over the last week to 10 days, and they're all telling me that Trump is still extremely popular in Tennessee, up to 80%. So you have to think that a strong endorsement by Trump is going to trump almost anything. And it's got, it's political season, so my mailbox is spouting all the mailers, and on Hagerty's, he seems to have a picture of Nancy Pelosi on every one of his mailers, and he's trying to associate Dr. Manny with Nancy Pelosi, so we can see where his campaign is going. But I do think in the end, the Trump endorsement is going to carry more weight than any other endorsements, the Ted Cruz's that come through town. Now, Dr. Manny has gone door to door, city to city, not door to door, and has had a stronger grassroots campaign. And I think that that's fueling his rise in standing, and to where it may be a fairly close race.
I now want to talk about masks a little bit. Courtney, I want to give you 1 minute here to, the governor is not issuing a mask mandate, as we know, but he has released a PSA for wearing masks. It's not a mandate, as we pointed out, but it is a suggestion. And does it do enough to help encourage mask wearing?
First of all, that PSA is great. I think it's very creative. The messaging is great. I watch it, I look at it, I can't help but think that the state of Tennessee just seems to be 3 steps behind the coronavirus. And it's because we have largely rejected science and data in favor of politics. So I feel like this PSA is helping us play catch up as it relates to masks and doing the things that we know will slow the spread of the virus.
George, I see you smiling. Well, what's on your mind there?
Well, science and data for months said masks didn't work. They were ineffective. Dr. Fauci said it.
That is not
Please,
true,
Courtney,
George.
let me finish, please.
George, that's not true.
Dr. Fauci said it. The World Health Organization. The World Health Organization. Courtney, I didn't interrupt you. Would you let me finish, please?
Well, you're not being accurate.
Yes, I am. Dr. Fauci said masks were not only ineffective because they didn't protect you, they weren't sealable. That created a problem in and of itself. The CDC was confused early on about masks, and the World Health Organization didn't change its guidance on masks until June. So here's the thing.
This is a common Fox talking point.
If people want to wear masks, if people want to wear masks, that's their business. I wear one. It seems to make sense to me.
About 10 seconds.
But to insult people by saying you're too stupid to understand science because you are not engaging in wearing a mask is insulting to them, because the darn experts were saying for a good long time that they weren't effective.
Did I say that? Did not say that.
You're saying they're rejecting science and data. You're calling them stupid.
I'm saying they're rejecting science and data, not just on mask wearing, but how the coronavirus spreads and what we know about it.
Every doctor I've talked to has said, if you're saying the same thing you said in March and February, now you're not paying attention to the problem of the virus.
Yeah,
I think that it's a good time for everyone to wear masks and try to do a simultaneous flattening of this curve versus a sequential flattening of the curve.
Yeah, and Dr. Buchanan addressed this very issue. She said the science isn't changing, but our understanding of the virus is evolving. Craig, I just want to I've got about 30 seconds. What do you think of the governor's PSA?
It's a fine PSA, but is it getting to where we need to be? I mean, the spread in the Southeast, the Southwest, and in California is being fostered by people going to bars. You know, so I don't see PSAs running in bars like that. So we need to get a handle on those places where people come in close contact to get a handle on the virus.
Thank you,
It's
Craig.
not going away. We're in the second inning of a 9-inning ball game.
And we'll leave right there on that analogy. Craig, Courtney, and George, thank you so much. We'll see you this time next week, and we'll see all of you same time at 12:30.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The views of guests on Tennessee This Week are their own and do not represent the views of WATE 6 on your side or Nexstar Broadcast.